Look what I've got. Isn't it gorgeous? You're probably going to be pretty surprised to hear, and some of you may be even shocked to hear, that I've only just started experimenting on film for the very first time in my career. I've been shooting for nearly 13 years now, and a couple of months ago was the first time I actually decided to pick one of these guys up. Why have I left it so long to have a go on a film camera? Why have I held back on using one of these beautiful analog machines? Reason number one is, by nature, I love to see results instantly. So what I love about the digital camera is being able to see the images come up on the screen straight away, and I can react and adjust and make decisions based off of what I can see coming straight through the camera. And obviously with a film camera, you don't have that luxury. You take your shot, you spend ages setting up your shot, then you take your shot, and then cross your fingers and hope for the best. It's a really strange thing going from taking a shot, seeing it straight away, making adjustments, making decisions, changing things around, to going to this, especially when I've been shooting for so long. Going from digital and getting used to that method of shooting and then slowing right down and going back to film was a really tough adjustment. So I'm going to set this up here so you can look at it while I speak. Whee! This is the camera that I decided to start my film journey on. It is the Mamiya C220, and this was, well, still is, but kindly lended to me from my dad. This was his film camera, and I believe it's straight from the 1970s, and it's still in perfect condition. It looks and feels like it's barely been used. And the thing that I personally love about it are how you focus it with these amazing bellows. Look at that. Woo! So cool, so old school, and I love how every element of this really forces you to slow down. You could not make the whole process more intricate and more delicate, and that's kind of what I love about it. So the other reason why I have kind of avoided film fairly deliberately is I never really was exposed to it when I was younger. As I've said before in one of my previous videos, when I got into photography, it really came from my dad. And although my dad did a lot of film photography, I mean, that's the only way he could do photography at the time, he's always been someone that has loved and admired new technology and innovation and things like that. And I think when digital came along, the ability to shoot without needing to process the images with all the chemicals and the complexities behind doing that, the mess of doing that, and the expense as well of developing film, he really took to digital and kind of left film behind. Although he still loves it and loves the feel and the finish that you get, and I think we can all agree it cannot really be replicated no matter how many filters you have. So when I got into photography, he really got me into digital, and that was the first camera that I used, and it was also the least complicated for me to use at the time. As I've also said before in my videos, the simpler the better for me. You know, everything about this in one way is very simplified, but in another way is complicated. And I think it depends on how you like to see results, how your brain works, and also how you like to shoot, that determines what kind of camera, what format is best for you. So I think I've really been put off by using film for quite a long time, and I've become so used to the instantaneous nature of digital, and I've gotten so used to my own way of shooting and that kind of way of working and that method. The idea of going back to this and trying something completely new and almost relearning how to shoot again seemed daunting to me. But as I've said in my previous video about taking risks, and as you get older, it seems harder to try new things and learn new things and get out of your routine, I decided, you know what? I'm going to do it now. I had a little bit of a quiet time early in the year, so I thought I'm going to have a go with this. I'm going to see how I get on. The thing that really drew me to starting this ultimately was the images that you get from it and the finish. I think with AI and with the kind of artificial imagery that we're seeing a lot nowadays, it really has made me go, I want to see something authentic. I want to see something raw. And I want to be able to produce things like that again. So that ultimately is what drew me to film camera. And of course, I knew that my dad still had film cameras. They weren't being used. As I've said, this is in perfect mint condition. And I thought, you know what? Let's give it a go. So I was up north at my parents' place on the west coast of Scotland, and I'd already let my dad know that I wanted to have a go with a film camera. So I believe he already had some film loaded in it. I went out to the beach just with my mum, my dad, my sister, and my sister's partner. Decided I'm just going to fire off some shots, see how I get on. It was a very, very strange process for me. You kind of have to spend a long time setting up the shot. So this idea of completely slowing down what is normally a very fast, a very energetic pace for me, albeit I was just photographing my family just kind of candidly around the beach. It wasn't like a fashion shoot where it was, you know, loads of movement and lots of things going on. It still felt quite overwhelming. You can't check the exposure and you can't see how the light's affecting what, you know, what's coming through the camera. You have to meter the light with a light meter first before you take the shot, and, you know, hope that it's going to be about right and make very calculated decisions about if you want to expose more for the highlights or more for the shadows, depending on what light you're working with. Luckily, on the day of the beach, we had pretty overcast weather, so the light was fairly flat, which I think probably worked in my favor as someone that had never used film before. The other thing, of course, was the viewfinder. So the viewfinder is down here. You can take this off and put a prism on so that you can see the viewfinder at this kind of same level. So you can hold it like this rather than looking down. And it also has a little magnifying poppy up bit. That was a strange thing for me, like looking down on the camera, that kind of format, that medium format way of shooting, and using the dials down here, the bellows down here to focus. And of course, the biggest thing for me that I found really strange was the fact that everything's reversed. So, you know, when I was moving this way, the camera was actually moving that way. So that in itself slows me down a huge amount, just trying to compose the shot, focus it, remembering that, you know, I've cocked the shutter and done the exposure and that everything's set to the right place. All these things that you have to take into consideration before you actually push the shutter down. And then, of course, once you press the shutter, you can't see anything. You don't know what you've taken. What I love about this film camera and what film does in general is the finish of the image that you get at the end. I just feel like the quality of the grain, the quality of the color, it is just not something that you can replicate. And believe me, I've tried to replicate it digitally in post so many times, and it just isn't the same. And it kind of just transforms the sensitivity of the image that you're taking. So I decided to do some stills, both digitally and on black and white film, on a music video shoot I did back in the summer, and you can really see the differences here. This really was my first attempt and my first real test at shooting movement with this film camera. And I had very little time and headspace to get these shots in the bag. I was working within a very fast-paced environment, and it was all being done in between me directing the motion as well. So the downsides for me personally really come with the speed in which you have to work from beginning, middle to end. Now, I must say, I really do appreciate the need to slow the process down, really take time and consideration in composing and lighting and planning that perfect shot, making every single moment count, making every single shot count. However, there are times when I find this process quite frustrating. With so many different things to think about and consider and plan, you know, technically speaking, I do really miss being able to just get lost in the view. Now, I realize that this all does come down to a lot more time and practice, and it's just something I don't have yet, but I'll get there. It all just comes down to patience. It's also worth bearing in mind that it's quite an expensive little hobby. Bearing in mind everything in photography is considered pretty expensive. Buying film, bearing in mind there's only about 12 shots per roll, depending on what format you're using. And then it's getting it developed, whether you do it yourself with all the chemicals and setting up a darkroom in your home or sending it off to a lab. It's not something that we can all invest in necessarily on a regular basis. But then in that way, I suppose it's exactly what makes all those images that much more precious.